At the class reunion, he had achieved success and fame, arriving with a beautiful girlfriend. He said, "If you hadn't let go back then, you'd be the wife of the Richards Group CEO by now." He sat across from me, his arm around his girlfriend, his expression indifferent. It's all in the past. The others, eager to stir the pot, started teasing. Under his gaze, I silently covered the scars on my wrist, forcing a faint smile. We've been over for a long time. As I recall, it was Emma Carter who initiated the breakup. Taking advantage of his girlfriend's trip to the restroom, the classmates began gossiping. Emma Carter. That's me. Ethan Richards sat across from me, a faint smile on his lips. Yet his gaze was icy cold. This was the first time we'd met in the 6 years since our breakup. Everything felt sudden and overwhelming. I hadn't planned to see him, especially since the class president assured me Ethan wouldn't come. But here he was. Now, Ethan Richards was a successful entrepreneur, a city-renowned young talent with an overseas degree. In his tailored suit, looking sharp and handsome, even his wristwatch was worth a fortune. Everyone sought to flatter him. By contrast, I had fallen far behind. Yes, he was the one who brought up the breakup first. Ethan, calm as ever, answered everyone's questions. Each person had their own interpretation. That I was greedy for money, unwilling to endure hardship, or simply bet on the wrong person and lost everything. Emma, I heard the guy you were with afterward went to jail, right? You even took on his debts. Is that why you came to this reunion? To ask for money? Amid the mockery, Ethan's deep, calm gaze stayed fixed on me, silent. I laughed awkwardly, not responding. The door opened, and Ethan's girlfriend walked back in. Sensing the strange atmosphere, she smiled and asked, "What happened while I was gone?" Ethan, shedding his earlier silence, gently held her hand and said, "Nothing. Just catching up." He sat back down smoothly, his gaze settling on me again, a faint smile forming, his dimples showing. Ethan mentioned to me, "If you hadn't let go back then, you'd be the wife of the Richards Group CEO now." Several people exchanged looks filled with schadenfreude. Back in the day, the Carter family was at its peak, and I was always surrounded by admiration wherever I went. That envy didn't fade over time. Instead, it became the reason for their ridicule years later. Ethan broke the awkwardness, his voice cold yet commanding. "It's all in the past." The group quickly caught on that he didn't want to continue this topic, and shifted the conversation. His girlfriend raised her glass toward me. "Thank you for letting him go. When we get married, you must come." I silently covered the scars on my wrist, forcing a faint congratulations. "Why didn't you explain it to him clearly?" On the phone, my best friend Chloe Johnson was indignant for me. The reunion ended early. Wrapped in my coat, I stood in the cold wind, exhaling a breath of warm air. "He has a girlfriend now," I replied. The other end of the call went quiet. "He has a girlfriend?" Chloe sounded incredulous. "Yes." Classmates left in small groups, their figures dispersing under the streetlights. Their glow refracted on the snowy ground like shattered glass. "Such a shame. You finally saw him after all this time. After everything you've done." "Chloe, no one waits forever. Some words, if left unsaid, become meaningless when spoken later." The cold wind stung my eyes, making them ache. I blinked away the burning tears. I've given up. Even after all these years of effort, struggling to climb out of the mud, hoping to meet him in the most dignified way. "It's too late now." "All right. We'll talk when you get back." The temperature had already dropped below freezing. Taxis were hard to find. I stood for a while, my hands going numb from the cold, watching as the app showed I was still in the queue. Behind me, the sound of high heels echoed. A woman's gentle, silky voice. "Ethan, the snow is beautiful. It's so cold outside. Let's go to the car." "I'll be there in a moment," Ethan's distinct voice replied. "All right. Hurry." As she walked past me, she gave me a meaningful look, then went to a nearby car, opening the door just enough to reveal a bracelet on her wrist. The Richards family heirloom. It had once been mine. After the breakup, I'd returned it through someone else. So, she wasn't just his girlfriend, she was his fiancée. The crowd dispersed until it was just me and Ethan left. My taxi hadn't arrived yet. Ethan stood behind me, silent as ever. The two of us lingered in the quiet, our shadows overlapping under the streetlights. My mind drifted back to that night, the night we broke up. On his way to see me, Ethan had been in a car accident. His brother called, furious. "Ethan's in the hospital. Is he in danger?" "No, or you wouldn't have come. Take care of him, Emma. He got the offer to go abroad. He'll succeed someday. Why can't you wait? Do you need money that badly? After all he's done for you, can you really just forget it all?" His brother had been on the verge of breaking down, nearly calling me ungrateful. The phone was suddenly snatched away and smashed. It was fair to say I'd abandoned him. His resentment toward me was justified. "How much do you owe?" Ethan's cold voice pulled me back to the present. "It's none of your business." I inhaled the icy air, my throat stinging from the alcohol. A sudden coughing fit doubled me over. Clutching the lamppost, the alcohol churned in my stomach, tears streaming down from the choking. Ethan stood by, watching coldly. The taxi finally arrived. The driver leaned out. "Heading to Westwood Mansions?" "Yes." I straightened, grasped the car door, but was suddenly pulled away, crashing into Ethan's arms. He asked, "What are you going there for?" Westwood Mansions was an exclusive area. Not just anyone could enter. I tried to push his hand away, but his grip tightened on my wrist. The heat of his touch spread to my chest. I struggled but couldn't break free. Looking up, I met his dark, unreadable eyes. "Mr. Richards, what are you trying to say?" His black eyes remained calm, revealing no emotion. The wind whipped through, scattering my hair. I forced a smile and said, "You think, like everyone else, that the money I've earned is dirty. 50,000 a month. Will that do?" Ethan's cold voice interrupted me. "What do you mean? For the money you need. If 50,000 isn't enough, say the amount." I suddenly raised my hand. The crisp sound of a slap echoed in the cold night. Ethan's face bore a clear imprint of my hand. From a distance, his fiancée cried out in alarm. She rushed out of the car. "Live your life well. And keep your hands out of mine," I said. I threw out those words and got into the car to leave. "You hit him." Chloe handed me a cup of warm water. "Yeah. He tried to take care of me." I curled up on the couch, enduring waves of stabbing pain in my stomach, slowly sipping the water. After a while, I suddenly turned and ran to the bathroom to throw it up. Chloe patted my back. "You know you shouldn't drink if your stomach's bad." I took a few deep breaths and wiped away the water left on my lips from rinsing. My esophagus burned fiercely. Was it worth it? Liking him for all these years? I looked up at myself in the mirror. My damp eyelashes clumped together. My black hair was wet and clinging to my forehead. My face was pale. Chloe's complaints sounded distant, unclear. "If you hadn't been so resolute about breaking up, he wouldn't be who he is now." Today, I thought of Ethan's fiancée again. Compared to me, she shone with brightness and joy. I vaguely remembered that years ago, I had been like that too. But I felt too hard. By the time I climbed out of the pit, everything had changed. When Chloe finished her work at Westwood Mansions, we walked hand in hand down the road to our rented apartment. Suddenly, I got a call from Ethan's brother. "Emma," he said, "if you're struggling, I can arrange a job for you." I didn't reply, waiting to hear more. "They're getting married next month. Jane's a good person. Her family's well off too. Don't worry. She won't let him get hurt." He paused for a moment, then added, almost apologetically, "We just want Ethan to live a good life." Years ago, all our mutual friends had taken Ethan's side without exception. After the call ended, Chloe's eyes were red. "They don't understand anything. It's fine." Since I had to stay in this city for a while, I found a job nearby. During the interview, the HR manager casually asked, "Do you have depression?" "It's in the past. I'm fine now. I have a certificate from my doctor to prove it." Previous companies had rejected me during background checks because of this, but this company was small. And that evening, I got an offer. I thought the class reunion would be the last time Ethan and I crossed paths. But 3 days later, Ethan appeared at my company as my new boss. My desk was moved right outside his office. I refused. You can quit, Ethan said without looking up, his voice cold. Just hand in your resignation to HR. I laughed in disbelief. You're firing me just because I won't switch desks? He paused his pen, finally raising his head to look at me. I'm just giving you a choice. Do you really think I'm after something from you? I thought of Chloe arguing with the landlord last night over rent and forced a smile. Vice President Richards, your integrity is unparalleled. I have no fear. Ethan nodded slightly. Good. On your way out, close the door. And make sure your chair faces away from me. I don't want to see your face. For the next few days, we barely interacted. A week later, the company had a team-building event. As the new hire, I was pressured into drinking far too much. Miss Carter, if you don't drink, we'll dock your pay. Don't worry. If you get drunk, we'll take you home. We're all women here. What's there to be afraid of? The manager smiled. And amidst the jeers, I downed my last drink for the night, collapsing onto the table, unconscious. The next morning, I woke up on a large bed, sunlight streaming through the window, too bright to open my eyes. As I sat up, the blanket slipped off, revealing the soft bathrobe wrapped around me. I froze for a moment, then got out of bed and walked into the spacious living room. Ethan was sitting there, one leg crossed over the other, wearing a hotel bathrobe and reading a newspaper. When he saw me, he looked up lazily. You're awake. Breakfast is on the table. Eat and get some more rest. A chill ran through me. My face turned pale. The newspaper was casually placed on the coffee table. His slightly open collar revealed faint, ambiguous marks on his skin. Unfortunately, last night, you were the one who made the first move. I was struck as if by lightning. My memory of the night was completely blank. Impossible, I said. Ethan placed a contract in front of me, complete with my fingerprint. It stated that I would become his mistress in exchange for a monthly payment of $10,000. This isn't my fingerprint. Is that so? Ethan chuckled lightly. Are you sure? Facing his calm, composed gaze, I opened my mouth but couldn't say a word. Ignoring my discomfort, he pulled out a voice recorder. I accidentally recorded your confession last night. Would you like to hear your own vile thoughts? I trembled all over, feeling like I had fallen into an ice pit. A wave of intense shame washed over me. Even when hidden, such thoughts felt dirty. Now that they'd been voiced and used against me, it was as if I'd committed a crime. Ethan leaned forward, his eyes shadowed, his expression unreadable. How about I play this recording for Jane and her family? What do you think? Emma. I clenched my hands into fists, my nails digging into my palms. Are you doing this to get back at me? Yes, he said flatly. You didn't want me to live well back then. Why should I let you live well now? Two choices. Honor the contract or I'll release the recording. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, matching the thumping of my heartbeat in my ears. My lips were dry as I slowly looked up. Then release it, I said, my voice hollow. Under his icy stare, I numbly added, I won't be a mistress. Ethan looked at me with a faint smile. Emma Carter, who do you think you are? Do you think you still have the right to choose? In the bathroom, I found my crumpled clothes. Meanwhile, Ethan's clothes were neatly arranged on the coat rack by the door. The contrast stung my eyes. I sighed, silently changed, and left the hotel. Chloe called me, her voice trembling. Emma, they're demanding $50,000. If you don't pay, they'll expose your past. They won't tell you where your mother's ashes or her belongings are either. The sky was gray, overcast, with no sunlight. Chloe hadn't saved much because of my medical bills. I had little savings left too. They're blackmailing us, Chloe said, her voice breaking. I'll figure it out, I replied. After much hesitation, I dialed a number. It rang for a long time before it was answered. Miss Carter, what can I do for you? I exhaled deeply. Dr. James, I'm sorry to bother you, but I need to borrow $40,000. It was the first time I'd ever asked anyone for money. My entire body burned with shame. There was a commotion on the other end of the line. I have to go. Emergency surgery, he said abruptly. I hadn't expected much. already prepared for him to hang up. But at the last moment, he said, "Send me your account number. I'll transfer it to you today." Then the call ended. The sky was still gray and heavy, but the cold tone of the busy signal felt a little warmer now. That evening, the manager tapped on my desk. "We're having dinner with a client tonight. You're coming." A few hours earlier, I had just asked for an advance on my salary. With the borrowed money and my savings, I barely scraped together the $50,000. When I entered the private dining room, I saw Ethan, tall and composed. He mingled with ease. The crystal chandelier above reflected a glow that outlined his sharp features. The manager gave me a light push. Suddenly, all eyes turned to me. "Vice President Richards. Is she from your company?" Ethan glanced at me casually. "A new hire," he said. "What kind of new hire needs the VP to personally bring her along?" Quite impressive. Amid the chatter, everyone sat down. The manager arranged for me to sit beside Ethan. He leaned close and whispered, "Be smart tonight. If you need to drink, drink." The group smiled knowingly. "Vice President Richards, can your new employee handle her alcohol?" Before Ethan could answer, the manager quickly said, "She can handle it. Don't worry." He placed a glass of wine in front of me. "Start with a toast." Ethan smiled faintly, tapping his fingers lightly on the table. I picked up the wine glass, held my breath, and downed it in one gulp. The spicy liquor burned its way down my throat, igniting a fire that raged through my stomach. Amid the applause and cheers, someone was ready to refill my glass when Ethan spoke, smoothly changing the topic. "What were we talking about earlier? Let's continue." The lively atmosphere returned, with many toasting Ethan. He politely declined each time, claiming his stomach couldn't handle alcohol. But all those drinks ended up being redirected to me, courtesy of the manager. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore and stumbled to the restroom. The faucet at the sink was turned on, water running steadily. I gagged violently, my head spinning, hair coming loose and dipping into the sink, turning wet in no time. After sending a text to Chloe, I completely ran out of strength. I leaned against the sink, head down, eyes shut tight as I gasped for breath. The sound of deliberate footsteps echoed outside. The door opened slowly. I assumed it was another woman entering the restroom, but instead, Ethan's calm voice cut through the silence. "You're already at your limit?" Summoning what little strength I had, I stood up shakily, staggering toward the door to leave. Ethan grabbed my arm and dragged me back. His large hand pressed against the back of my neck, radiating searing heat. "Let go of me," I said hoarsely, each word scraping painfully against my throat, raw from the stomach acid. Ethan easily pulled me in front of the mirror, forcing me to face my reflection. He lifted my chin with his hand, a cold smirk on his lips. "Take a good look at yourself," he said mockingly. "Looking like this, aren't you afraid of attracting the wrong kind of attention?" In the mirror, my eyes glistened with unshed tears. My cheeks flushed crimson. Loose strands of hair framed my face, and my collar was slightly open. Ethan's dark, intense gaze roamed my body through the mirror, utterly unrestrained. I closed my eyes, trembling all over. "Who could have worse intentions than you?" I whispered, my voice shaking. Ethan chuckled softly, leaning down to whisper in my ear, "Come home with me tonight. What do you say?" "Get lost," I snapped, but he silenced me with a kiss, his forceful lips robbing the air from my lungs. My blood, heated by the alcohol, surged through my veins like molten lava, burning every inch of me. The lights blurred into a swirling haze. Droplets of water clung to my vision like a thin veil, each one a stinging acid drop that landed on my heart. I broke out in a cold sweat, weakly pushing against him. It felt as if I had been dragged back to those dark days, staring helplessly at the vibrant world around me, knowing I didn't belong. "Ethan, please let me go." My voice was barely audible, falling into an abyss of silence. I hit the bottom hard. It should have hurt, but I couldn't feel anything anymore. "Emma," Ethan called out to me, his tone urgent. It wasn't the usual venom-filled glare he used to throw my way. This time, there was a trace of panic in his eyes. For a moment, I couldn't tell whether the man in front of me was the Ethan from years ago or the Ethan standing before me now. I whispered, "Ethan, I never want to see you again. The fever came swiftly and fiercely. I was in a daze, writhing in pain under the thick blanket, my body trembling uncontrollably. Outside, the northern wind howled. Half conscious, I dreamed of the past. I was lying on Ethan's back, asking him, "What if I die?" "Ethan." He carried me steadily, his voice gentle as he soothed me. "Don't say that. It's just a fever. Once you get your injection, you'll be fine. Hey, do you have enough for your living expenses?" "Injections are expensive," I muttered weakly. "It's fine." "How is it fine? How many part-time jobs have you taken on?" Ethan didn't answer. He placed me gently at the nurse's station and crouched down in front of me, speaking seriously. "As long as you're safe and sound, nothing else matters." I buried myself deeper in my thick winter coat, conflicted. "When my parents stop fighting, I'll ask them for money and pay you back." Ethan reached out to tousle my hair, his gaze tender. "Trust me, one day, we'll have plenty of money." But I didn't turn out the way he had hoped. Safe and sound. The night Ethan left for an out-of-town competition, I returned home and pushed open my parents' bedroom door. Inside, my father was holding another woman protectively in his arms. That was when my seemingly perfect life began to crumble. What followed was endless. Heated arguments between my parents. Eventually, my father disappeared without a word, leaving my family buried under a mountain of debt. Late one night, a group of middle-aged men came to collect what was owed. Under the flickering light, they shouted with excitement, their crude hands leaving bruises on my skin. My mother's heart-wrenching screams mixed with their mocking laughter, creating a chaotic storm in my mind. The images fast-forwarded like a reel on speed. My mother, driven to desperation, ended her life in the bathtub. Chloe was the one who found my lifeless body and brought me to a distant southern city. On a rainy day, I sat curled up in the corner of a hospital in my school uniform, disheveled and vacant. "She has a family history of depression," the doctor said. "Any relatives?" Chloe looked at me with concern. "She has a boyfriend. He's out of town for a competition. Notify him to come." The doctor's professional tone blended with clinical jargon. "Her suicidal tendencies are pronounced, and the treatment will be challenging. She'll need long-term care for years. Her family should be prepared for the long haul." By then, my mental state couldn't support me reporting the crimes or seeking justice. Chloe and I became like stray dogs, fleeing our childhood home with nothing but the clothes on our backs. That same day, Ethan's name topped the list of competition winners. He'd secured a scholarship to study abroad. When he called, the wind howled on the other end of the line. "Emma." His voice was impossibly tender. "I didn't let you down. In 3 years, I'll marry you." I stared at the iron gate slowly closing behind me, realizing I'd lost my way home. "Ethan, I don't think I can be with you anymore," I whispered, choking on my tears as they fell silently. He held his breath. "Why?" I opened my mouth but hesitated. His future was bright. How could I selfishly tie him to the rainy, desolate corner of my world? Beyond the bars of the window, a girl sobbed uncontrollably. The boy beside her wore a mask of indifference and frustration. I saw love disappear from someone's eyes for the first time. It was despairing. The wind blew, exposing bruises and bite marks on my neck. I wiped my tears and said, "Ethan, live your life well. Let's call it quits." The sound of a ticking clock echoed in my ears. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, landing softly on the sofa not far away, like golden threads woven into the air. I blinked, the nightmare fading. Sitting up, I saw a man on the sofa, quietly peeling an apple. His pale, slender fingers worked skillfully, and soon a perfectly peeled apple lay in his hands, round and pristine. It was Ethan. Hearing my movements, he looked up and met my gaze. Wordlessly, he stood and pressed the call button. Moments later, the doctor entered, shining a light into my eyes before declaring, "She's fine. Her nutrition is lacking, though. Make sure to include more protein in her meals." Ethan nodded. "Thank you." The door closed behind the doctor. He walked to the side of the bed, handing me the apple. "Don't overthink it. Just focus on getting better." I didn't take it. Instead, I got out of bed and rummaged through the cabinet, looking for my phone. It was gone, along with my outdoor clothes. He watched me tear through the hospital room without a word. Ethan, what are you trying to do? I stood barefoot on the floor. A shaft of sunlight streamed in, reflecting my pale, haggard face on the window. You don't know what I'm trying to do? Ethan placed the apple on the bedside table, pulled out a tissue, and slowly wiped his hands. I want you. He sat there in the sunlight, his dark eyes fixed on me without reservation, burning with an intensity that made me feel humiliated. I clenched my trembling fists. Ethan, you can't treat me like this. Ethan stood, closing the gap between us in a few steps. He towered over me, smoothing my disheveled hair. Why can't I? I'm in love with someone else. Please, don't bother me anymore. Oh, really? His face turned expressionless. He cupped my face with both hands, his lips moving closer to mine, stopping barely an inch away. I couldn't open my eyes. The moment he tilted his head, I shut them tight, my body shivering uncontrollably. Ethan chuckled, his cold voice piercing my ears. Emma, you're lying. The private hospital was located in the suburbs, surrounded by endless forests. I couldn't leave, nor could I contact anyone. I tried asking the doctors and nurses for help, but they claimed they couldn't intervene. Ethan came every day, usually in the evening, arriving as if from a long journey. He would sit and talk to me. I resisted all his attempts at intimacy, though he didn't push too hard. Recently, my dreams have been filled with memories of the past. Back then, I would constantly say his name. Ethan, you're going to be rich and successful one day. Ethan sighed silently. What kind of milk do you want today? Banana flavored. Once, in his effort to buy me banana milk, Ethan skipped class for the first time and got caught by the teacher. Later, when he went to college, rumors about him dating the campus beauty spread. I rode over 10 subway stops to his dormitory and sat outside crying. Ethan rushed down in the middle of the night, quickly dressed, and gently wiped my tears. Don't cry. If you want me, I'm yours. I'll only ever belong to you. That's not how you confess love, I had said, stunned. He froze for a moment before pulling me tightly into his arms. I love you. Back then, neither of us could have guessed we'd end up like this so many years later. I'm getting married tomorrow. The sunset outside hadn't yet faded, its warmth lingering in the air. Ethan's voice pulled me out of my distant thoughts. Do you have anything you want to say to me? I held the half-empty glass of milk, staring at his face in a daze. Suddenly, I understood why I'd been dreaming so often lately. I was saying goodbye to the old Emma Carter and Ethan Richards. The TV had been broadcasting news about him and Jane every day. They were the golden couple, a perfect match. Once, that had been the future we'd envisioned for ourselves. But now, the Emma Carter standing here was buried in debt. What right did I have? Congratulations, I said quietly. May you have children soon. Ethan's hand, which had been peeling an apple, froze. The knife slipped and nicked his finger. Blood quickly seeped out. He paused, pulled out a tissue to press against the cut, and laughed softly. It's fine. Jane and I are just going through the motions. If you want children, I have no objections. Ethan, let it go. Please, I said suddenly, feeling utterly exhausted. Let's just end this gracefully. Ethan stopped peeling the apple and tossed it back into the fruit basket. He stared at me with a cold, mocking smile. Just let it go? Why should I? You were the one who started this. And now you're saying you're tired of it? That you want to leave so easily? Then what am I supposed to be? A dog you play with and discard when you're bored? I closed my eyes, trying to dispel the sunlight that painted faint halos behind my eyelids. Then I'll return it to you, I said softly. Ethan frowned. What did you say? I stared at the setting sun outside the window. If you don't want me to live well, I can die. Suddenly, a hand grabbed my jaw, forcing me to turn my face toward him. Ethan's eyes were blazing with anger. Emma, are you insane? If you wanted to die so badly, why didn't you do it back then? I don't remember when he left that night. Later, Ethan's brother, Zach, a friend from years ago, burst through the door. Emma, what did you promise me? He demanded, his voice sharp. I sat there, dazed, as his accusations rained down on me. Do you know how much Ethan stands to lose if he cancels the engagement? You're an adult now. Can you stop being so selfish and reckless? Always leaving Ethan to clean up your mess? Can't you think about him for once? What happened? I asked weakly. What happened? Zach laughed bitterly. Ethan is calling off the wedding because of you. And you're asking what happened? My ears buzzed, my mind going blank as I sat frozen. Calling off the wedding? What would I be then? A home-wrecking third party? Zach grabbed my wrist forcefully, pulling me out of bed. Come with me. You used to be good at this, didn't you? Bored. Found someone new. Make up any excuse you like. Zach. His voice shook with rage. Do you think any of this would have happened if you hadn't come back? His furious roars echoed in the wind and snow, freezing every sense in my body. That night, Zach dragged me to Ethan's office building, its lights still blazing late into the night. But by the time we arrived, the press conference had already begun. Ethan sat confidently under the spotlight, answering questions with ease. Is it true that the wedding is being called off because of a third party? A reporter asked. Ethan smiled calmly. Jane and I had some differences. We decided to part ways amicably. Zach's face darkened, his grip on my wrist tightening to the point of pain. Don't move, he hissed. But a source claims you've rekindled a romance with your first love. Is that true? Ethan remained composed. Just rumors. If there are no further questions, this press conference is over. He rose to leave. But just then, someone in the crowd shouted, There he is. That's him. Suddenly, every camera in the room swung in my direction. I was exposed under the spotlight, disheveled and humiliated. Reporters swarmed in like a tidal wave. In just a few seconds, I was surrounded, leaving no room to escape. Questions were fired at me one after another. What is your relationship with Ethan Richards? Did you really interfere in someone else's marriage? The sound of camera shutters clicked relentlessly. Ethan's smile froze abruptly. He stood up, pushing through the crowd toward me. It's not true. I didn't. I tried weakly to defend myself, but my voice was quickly drowned out by the reporter's fervent questioning. There's breaking news, one reporter shouted excitedly, raising his phone. A recording played from the phone, my voice ringing out through the chaos. It was filled with tears and drunken slurs. Aaron, I love you. It hit me instantly. Someone had recorded me. For a long time, I thought nothing could make my life worse. But when this storm hit, completely destroyed me. She's the other woman. Isn't she? Shameless. The whispers around me felt like slaps to my face. The blood drained from my cheeks as the recording pinned me to the pillar of shame. I'm sorry, Zach muttered. Take her away. Ethan pushed through the crowd, his face showing panic for the first time. The world around me turned white. I could only hear the murmurs repeating over and over. Her dad owed debts. Her mom committed suicide. She has severe hereditary depression and was confined to a mental hospital in the South for 5 years. Isn't she just mentally ill? The crowd erupted. If she's sick, why is she out here hurting others? She's crazy. Why didn't she just die? Ethan stopped in his tracks, suddenly raising his head to look at me. His expression was a mix of shock, disbelief, and horror. I sat helplessly in the chaotic crowd, my blood running cold until my entire body felt frozen. Emma! Ethan's voice trembled as he called my name. I knew what was coming. I could only sit in quiet resignation, waiting for the final blow to fall and shatter my life completely. And she was assaulted, the anonymous source concluded. The moment those words hit, Ethan's face turned as pale as a sheet of paper. From the day I returned from the office, I hadn't spoken a word. The blinds in my study remained shut for 3 days, keeping the room shrouded in darkness. Missed calls filled my phone screen, but I didn't open any of them. It felt as though time had paused, trapping me in a void. I sat there, head down, lifeless. The cold voice of the man who had taken Emma away echoed in my ears. All of us wanted her to live, Mr. Richards. But your iron-handed methods have crushed all our efforts to nothing. Chloe had been stopped by the security guards outside. She yelled at me with fury. Ethan, do you even know what happens when she doesn't take her medication? Keeping her locked up is no different from killing her. Words like depression and mental institution spun in my mind like sharp needles. stabbing at my thoughts until I couldn't breathe. Zach knocked on the door before pushing it open slightly and standing in the doorway. Hey, are you feeling any better? Why? My voice was hoarse, my chest aching with an unbearable weight. Zach was silent for a moment before apologizing. I'm sorry. I didn't think it was necessary to check. The information was fake. Is that so? My voice was soft, almost lifeless. Zach hesitated. When I told you she had moved abroad and had several boyfriends, Emma was actually confined to a mental hospital in the South. I didn't know. I swear. His explanation felt hollow, meaningless. I knew I couldn't blame Zach entirely. If I had asked more questions, maybe things wouldn't have turned out this way. But I didn't have the energy to listen to his excuses anymore. Chloe barged in, ignoring the secretary's attempts to stop her. The sudden light made me squint slightly, but I didn't try to stop her. I'm sorry, Vice President Richards. The secretary mumbled before closing the door, leaving us in dim silence once again. Chloe stood there, as though unwilling to have anything to do with me. Vice President, there are some things that need to be said now. A sliver of cold wind blew in through the small gap in the window, chilling me to the bone. I sat there motionless, listening quietly. When you make mistakes, you'll face retribution eventually, sooner or later. She paused, her voice trembling. Last year, on Emma's birthday, I jokingly asked her who she loved most in the world. She said, first, my mom. Second, Ethan. I closed my eyes. That answer pierced me to the core. Back then, her condition was improving. She only needed a small dose of medication daily to live like a normal person. So this year, to sort through her mother's belongings, I brought her back. She always said the breakup back then was too messy. This time, she just wanted to reunite with you properly, even if it was from afar. Even just seeing you as a successful businessman would have been enough. Chloe's eyes reddened. She knows she's not worthy of you anymore. Not worthy of me? My hands curled into fists. Do you know how you got that competition slot back then? I froze, sensing the truth rushing toward me like a tidal wave. It was pre-assigned to someone else. Emma wrote a letter demanding fairness and transparency. That's the only reason the spot went to you. But by doing so, she offended many people. After her father ran away, she and her mother faced endless harassment. The invisible weight around my neck tightened, suffocating me. Did she get bullied because of that? I asked, my voice trembling. Chloe continued, you were at the competition for about a week, so you wouldn't have known what happened. Emma's family collapsed. Her dad left with another woman, leaving behind massive debts. Debt collectors hounded her and her mom constantly. Her mother committed suicide, and Emma's condition worsened until she was admitted to the hospital. She was tormented so badly back then, she wasn't even recognizable anymore. Chloe's voice cracked as she glared at me. When you had your car accident, Emma cried and begged me to let her die instead. How could she have come to you? I felt my world crumble around me. Memories of the past few months clawed at my mind, torturing me. I had allowed the manager to get Emma drunk and send her to my room, coaxing her into revealing her secrets. I'd fabricated a fake contract just to see her struggle and despair. I'd humiliated her again and again, and in the end, I'd locked her away in that private hospital. Chloe had tried to reach me so many times, but I ignored her, asking instead why Emma didn't just die back then. Emma's hollow gaze had always lingered on me. I thought it was because she still loved me. But now, I realized she had been silently asking how I could be so cruel. Why didn't anyone tell me? I muttered, my voice breaking. How could we explain it to you? Chloe sobbed. She was sick. Just staying alive was already a luxury. All she wanted was to not drag you down with her. Chloe's words hit me like a hammer to the chest, crushing me under their weight. She thought your education was more important than anything. That competition was her last hope for you. She just wanted you to live well. Ethan, does she deserve this? Does she deserve to die? Those words pierced through me, cutting deeper than anything else. The one who tormented her, humiliated her, and mocked her endlessly was me. The one who insulted her with that fake contract, knowing she would never stoop to such things, was also me. Chloe's voice was hoarse, her tone bitter. We tried everything to make Emma want to live again. But there was only one thing that worked. Your name, Ethan. She never forgot your name. When I left this place before, I jokingly told Chloe, I'll never come back here again. Turns out, you should never tempt fate. I fell ill again. In the southern city, it's always winter, just drier than usual. Normally, it rains icy droplets. But this year, surprisingly, it snowed. The doctors and nurses chatted idly, saying this was an unusually cold winter. Global warming has made Earth less and less suitable for human survival. The new year was approaching. Outside the window, the trees were stripped bare. Not a single leaf left. I pressed my face against the glass, exhaling a mist that fogged the pane. There was someone downstairs. He stood there every day. Isn't he cold? I asked. Chloe passed by expressionlessly, carrying a cup of warm milk. Oh, probably not, she replied. He hasn't been in a good mood lately. Even Dr. Jiang hasn't. I've been treading lightly around both of them lately, afraid of setting them off. Chloe paused, realizing she might have scared me. She softened her tone. Drink the milk. Take your medication in an hour. Dr. Jiang said he'd take you out to build a snowman tonight. I glanced at the person outside again, something about him feeling familiar. Chloe pulled the curtains closed. Stop looking, or you'll go blind. I climbed back into bed. After taking my medication, I leaned against the pillows and played a game on my phone. From outside, I heard Chloe talking to Dr. Jiang. A moment later, the door opened, and he walked in. I quickly hid my phone, pretending to sit up properly. Have you taken your meds? Dr. Jiang asked. The scent of disinfectant filled the room. His gaze swept over me before settling on my face. Miss Carter, I'm not going to scold you for playing games. My cheeks flushed bright red. I sheepishly pulled my phone back out. How did you know I was playing? I play too. The background music is familiar, he said, smiling faintly. He washed his hands, removed his white coat, and glanced at me through the mirror. Aren't you going to get dressed? We're going to build that snowman. Dr. Jiang worked in thoracic surgery at the same hospital. The first time I met him, it was autumn. The weather had cleared up unexpectedly, and I crouched by the fence outside, staring at a stray ball of yarn that had appeared. He walked by, pausing to look down at me. Excuse me, I panted, exhausted. Can you help untangle this for me? He glanced up at the sign on the fence. According to the rules, you're not allowed to touch anything dangerous. When I didn't move, he added, what are you trying to do? Cat's cradle. Dr. Jiang checked the time, then crouched down. I'll play with you, but when we're done, I'm taking the string. His lunch break was short. Quietly, through the bars of the fence, I held out my hands to play with him for a while. When he was about to leave, I said, thank you. We crossed paths a few more times after that, though he was usually too busy to notice me. Then one day, he came back. He pulled out the string. Sorry, I've been busy lately. After that, he started chatting with me. You don't talk much, he observed. Why? I'm sick. I don't have anything cheerful to say, and I don't want to burden others with my feelings. Dr. Jiang stared at me silently. Over time, he began visiting more frequently. Some days, he looked completely exhausted. I tried learning a few jokes to tell him. Every time, his gaze softened as he listened. Emma, he once asked, what's your wish? I want everyone to be happy, including myself. That night, I put on my gear quickly. Dr. Jiang helped me into a down jacket, held my hand, and led me downstairs. Every few steps, there was a security gate. Only he could take me out. Under the night sky, snow fell thickly, covering everything in white. My hat turned snowy within moments. Dr. Jiang handed me a small shovel. Take it easy. The cold air oddly lifted my mood. I carried the shovel, circling a frozen fountain. When I turned back, I suddenly saw Ethan standing not far away. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw covered in stubble. He just stood there, staring at me. Ethan, called softly, surprised. His lips moved. Emma, I was wrong. In the past, I would have responded with pride and arrogance, demanding, what exactly were you wrong about? But now, I just clutched the shovel tightly, feeling awkward and unsure. It's fine. I had been through too much pain. The sharp edges of my pride had long been worn down. The wind howled in the dark, carrying snow through the air. Ethan walked closer, slowly kneeling in front of me. How can it be fine? His voice trembled. Emma, please say something to me. I thought for a moment before replying seriously. I wish us both good health in the new year. In that instant, all the color drained from Ethan's face. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he shook. Don't treat me like this. Please. I touched his face. It was icy cold, just like before. I cupped his face carefully and said earnestly, I wanted to meet you again in a dignified way. Instead, I made a mess of everything. I'm sorry. It's my fault. Ethan whispered. If I had chosen to leave your life back then, none of this would have happened. I spoke slowly, with sadness in my voice. At the reunion, I asked the class president if you would be there. He said no, so I went. I didn't know why he lied to me. I just wanted to hear about you, to see if you were doing well. Ethan broke down completely, crying uncontrollably. I'm sorry, Emma. It's my fault. All of it. I smiled faintly, not sure what to feel. Ethan, during your hardest times, I wasn't there for you either. He held my hands tightly and noticed the scars on my wrists. You don't have to feel guilty. I won't force you to stay. Years from now, we just argue about who owes who more. I gently brushed the snowflakes off his lashes. Ethan, seeing your success makes me happy. I promised I'd make money for you, didn't I? He shook his head, clutching my hands. Without you, what's the point of anything I've achieved? My nose was red from the cold as I blinked back tears. Look at my scarf. It cost over $100. I already have everything I need. Ethan's gaze dimmed completely. His voice trembled. There's no going back. Is there? Ethan, you have your life, and I have mine. I'm not going back to the North City. Hurtful words aren't easily forgotten. If I return, every step I take will feel like walking on blades. That kind of pain is far worse than letting go of a relationship. Ethan took a shaky breath, clasping my hands tightly, warming them as he had done so many years ago. I'm sorry for the recording. I set you up that night. I didn't touch you. My eyes burned with unshed tears. Then apologize properly. Ethan, say you're sorry. He was devastated. His eyes etched with my face as if making a final goodbye. I'm sorry. I patted his shoulder gently but couldn't bring myself to say, it's okay. Ethan, I wish you peace and happiness in the future. The snow fell heavier, blanketing everything in white. I turned and walked away, my steps firm against the wind. Behind me, the howling wind carried faint sounds. I couldn't tell if it was the wind or Ethan's sobbing. Dr. Jiang stood under a dim streetlight, wearing a tan coat, his hands in his pockets. His sharp features were barely visible, his gaze steady. As I approached, I acted as if I hadn't noticed him. What did you see? I brushed the snow off my hat's brim, looking up with reddened eyes. Dr. Jiang, I said softly. Thank you. A few days later, I saw Ethan on the entertainment news. He had lost a lot of weight. In an interview, he faced the cameras. Ethan confessed everything he had done to the media. He admitted that he had coerced me and led me into saying those words on the recording. At the same time, he revealed a copy of the engagement agreement, signed by him and Jane. The document detailed a 2-year engagement period, which was meant to end amicably with both parties benefiting from their collaboration. Neither of them had ever planned to marry. The night everything fell apart was actually the date they had originally planned to hold a press conference, announcing the dissolution of their engagement. Ethan's actions inadvertently caused catastrophic damage to his company. Years of reputation and status crumbled overnight. Sometime later, Zach called me. Emma, I owe you an explanation, he began. He told me that he had been careless. Jane had grown restless, and she had exposed my story. The debt collectors who once blackmailed me for $50,000 had lost track of me when Ethan brought me to the private hospital. Jane had bought my story from them at twice the price. Zach added that he was worried about Ethan's state of mind and asked if I could go back. I gave him the same answer as always. I've said everything I needed to. There's nothing more I can do. 3 months later, my condition had stabilized, and I was ready to be discharged. The warm spring sunlight poured over me, and the flowers outside the window were in full bloom. The familiar smell of disinfectant wafted in. I knew it was Dr. Jiang. Got anything to eat? I've been busy all day. Give me something to snack on. He was always busy and lately had been coming to my room to scavenge food. I pulled off my wool scarf, revealing a small bag of freshly steamed red bean buns. Dr. Jiang grabbed them without hesitation, tearing open the package and devouring them. I stared at him until he asked, amused, "Why are you looking at me like that? You're easy to feed." I replied. After finishing his snack, he looked at me. "Have you ever thought about settling down here? Why do you ask?" "Well," he said, "I have an apartment for rent." I thought about it for a moment. "Are you short on money?" He looked sincere. So I added, "I don't have much income right now, so I might not be able to afford expensive rent." "It's very cheap," he said with a straight face. "No neighbors. I'm scared to live alone." I blinked, unsure if he was serious or just trying to convince me. On the day of my discharge, a soft spring breeze lifted my spirits, bringing a long-lost smile to my face. I forgot to check the traffic light while crossing the street, and Dr. Jiang yanked me back by the collar, pulling me straight into his arms. He held on to me, not letting go. "Emma," he said softly, almost casually, his lips curling into a slight smile. "I'm pursuing you." It sounded as natural as someone commenting on the weather. In the distance, a child played with a toy drum, its rhythmic pounding echoing through the street. My heart thudded in my chest, unsteady yet brave as I looked up at him. "I've loved someone for a very long time. I'm not sure," I trailed off. The wind tousled Dr. Jiang's hair. His gaze was gentle as he replied, "Miss Carter, I've loved someone for a very long time too. Give me a chance." In that moment, my eyes grew misty. "But I've been sick. My body isn't." "Miss Carter," he interrupted softly, "you once said you hoped everyone, including yourself, could be happy." He blinked, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "I hope your wish comes true." The breeze carried the scent of spring, sunlight filtering through the trees to rest on his brow. What I once thought was an unreachable spring had quietly arrived, blooming flowers across the land. By the following winter, Jane's company declared bankruptcy. The people who had once bullied Emma were also dealt with and sent to prison by Ethan. After several crises, Ethan's company finally recovered and was back on its feet. One day, Ethan sat alone in his office for a long time. Outside, snow fell heavily. The headlights from cars below merged into streams of light. He had been working nonstop for 2 weeks, lost in a haze of exhaustion. Suddenly, he remembered this same day a year ago, when it had also snowed. Emma had appeared at the class reunion. Her eyes filled with confusion and panic when she saw him with Jane. Since then, he had dreamed countless times about that moment, wishing he could change it. In his dreams, he had dissolved the engagement beforehand, reported the manager for drugging Emma, never forced her to drink, and never said those hurtful words. In his dreams, their reunion had been dignified, just as Emma had wished. She would have come back to him, curled up in his arms late at night, crying as she told him about her past suffering. He would have comforted her, kissed her, and proposed. They would have built a home together. He could almost see the wedding photos where Emma smiled beautifully, her hand intertwined with his. But every time he woke up, he lay alone in bed, the sound of the clock ticking forward reminding him that time marched on. Emma, however, was gone from his life forever. She had left South City completely. "Ethan, I wish you peace and happiness in the future." Her words were sincere and calm, but her red eyes betrayed the pain she felt. She had decided to leave, not because of anger or blame, but because he had hurt her so deeply. That wish, peace and happiness in the future, was like a gentle blade, cutting deeply into his heart, leaving a scar that would never fade. Due to years of irregular habits, Ethan had developed a severe stomach condition. The pain was excruciating during flare-ups. That night, he woke from a dream, lying alone in his cold bed. The crescent moon outside cast a faint glow. He vaguely remembered Emma sitting with him long ago, watching the moon together. Felt like a lifetime ago. A wave of longing hit him. He wanted to see her. The next day, he booked a flight to South City. A year had passed, but the weather was unchanged. Strong winds and heavy snow. People rushing through the streets. Following an address, Ethan found himself outside an apartment building. The sky was darkening, but the lights on the second floor remained off. He stood in a corner, waiting. Half an hour later, Emma's voice reached him, warm and sincere. The tomato milk wasn't very good. Next time, buy some plain milk. And I'll make it myself. Chloe likes it too. We'll invite her over to eat, she added. Ethan instinctively looked up. That familiar figure came into view, crashing into his line of sight. She wore a little white hat, perhaps pink or gray, but the snow had covered it, leaving only white. She walked steadily now, no longer swaying in the snow. Beside her was a tall man with glasses, his gentle gaze fixed on her. The man raised his eyes slightly, meeting Ethan's gaze through the snow. For a moment, neither man spoke. Dr. Jiang, Emma's voice interrupted. Are you listening to me? Yes, I heard you, he replied, shifting his attention back to her. You said you'd make tomato beef stew, but last time, you burned the pot. Emma hung her head in defeat. Oh, right. I forgot to buy a new pot. Dr. Jiang patted her hat lightly, as though comforting a big, clumsy polar bear. Go home first. The cat hasn't been fed yet. Then go buy the pot and milk together, she said. Why the rush? Because I want it tonight. Emma giggled and ran into the building. Dr. Jiang turned to look at Ethan. Ethan struggled to find words, finally saying, Congratulations. Dr. Jiang smiled faintly. Thank you. He knew Ethan had misunderstood. The son Emma mentioned was the cat they were raising together. But Dr. Jiang didn't feel the need to explain. Last year, when he had taken Emma out to build a snowman, he had already been given a chance to win her heart. Emma and Ethan had already reached the end of their story. They should move on and live their own lives. Emma's condition was stable now. Dr. Jiang was straightforward, patient, and not easily angered. A genuinely good man. Ethan knew she was doing well because he remembered what Emma looked like when she was happy. Dr. Jiang adjusted his glasses slightly, his sharp gaze unwavering. Mr. Richards, how many years have you known her? 14 years. Ethan replied without hesitation. You know her better than I do. Dr. Jiang remarked matter-of-factly. Her birthday is coming up, and I want to get her a gift. She doesn't like chocolate, but she enjoys snacks like chips. Ethan didn't need to think before responding. She prefers savory over sweet. Dr. Jiang nodded professionally. Thank you. The weight of Dr. Jiang's words, you know her better than I do, didn't escape Ethan. If he truly knew her, why had he hated her so deeply? Why had he subjected her to so much pain? A clear voice cut through the wind and snow. Ethan. Startled, Ethan turned his head. The face that had haunted his dreams suddenly appeared before him. Emma stood there with her umbrella, her arms full, her wide eyes reflecting confusion and shock. What are you doing here? Ethan's heart ached. In her eyes, he saw clarity and peace. She had let go. He hesitated for a moment before replying. I was passing by on business. I ran into Dr. Jiang and stopped to chat. Passing by this neighborhood? Emma asked, her tone tinged with skepticism. Dr. Jiang interjected. Why did you come down again? Emma seemed to remember something. She handed him the umbrella. The snow's getting heavier. I didn't want you to catch a cold, so I came to bring you this. Her lips curved slightly as she spoke to Dr. Jiang. Her gaze warm. The scene pierced Ethan's heart. Would you like to come in? Dr. Jiang asked politely. Ethan forced a smile. I can't. I have a flight tonight and need to hurry. Emma clutched her coat, then suddenly remembered something. Wait here, she said, dashing back inside. Dr. Jiang followed her without a word. Ethan waited outside, snow piling around him. The gray sky felt oppressively heavy, and his stomach began to ache again. Zach called. Hey, your test results came back. Zach hesitated. It's stomach cancer. Ethan didn't move, his gaze fixed on the heavy snowfall. I understand, he replied flatly, ending the call. He stood there as if nothing had happened. waiting patiently with his eyes on the doorway. After some time, warm light spilled from the building, forming a trapezoid on the snowy ground. Emma came out alone, bundled in layers like an oversized snowball. She carried a small red box. Struggling a bit to walk through the snow, she handed it to Ethan. "I baked these cookies myself. You can eat them on your way." Ethan accepted the box and was suddenly flooded with memories. Years ago, Emma loved baking, though her early attempts were awful. Eggshells in the batter, a strong eggy smell, every failure ending up in Ethan's stomach. Back then, he jokingly declared the kitchen off limits to her. Now, she could bake something presentable. Emma's sincerity was evident as she added, "Thank you for your donations." Ethan nodded, knowing she was referring to the organization helping people with mental health challenges and financial difficulties. He had been quietly donating every month, keeping only a small portion for his own expenses. "You're welcome," he said, his gaze lingering on her face. "It's cold. You should go back inside. I probably won't be back here again." Emma smiled faintly. "How could that be? One day, we'll need you for the awards ceremony." Ethan's throat tightened, but he didn't reply. As Emma turned and walked toward the door, her snow boots crunching against the ground, she stopped just before entering. She looked back and called out, "Ethan." Ethan immediately turned, his heart leaping to life. He waited, hoping she'd say something more. Instead, she smiled at him and said, "Happy New Year." It was a simple, ordinary blessing, no mention of health or happiness. Ethan's heart sank into silence. He stood motionless in the freezing wind as the snow swirled around him. Her words echoed in his mind, "Happy New Year." And just like that, she was gone. Ethan stood there for a long time, his chest hollow, before finally turning away, stepping back into the endless snowfall.